Welcome to the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production. For transcriptions, show notes, and extras, please visit us at theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. Now, broadcasting across the world from the heart of the American Bible Belt, here is your host, Michael B. Rush.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Black Swan Rising podcast. I'm your host, Michael B. Rush. It's been quite a while since the last podcast. I believe I posted last in April, and it's now the first week of August of 2026. And I have had a wonderful summer, and I hope that you have as well. I've been quite busy. I've traveled to 13 different countries, saw all kinds of amazing things that I want to talk about in some future episodes. I went and visited the mountain in Germany where the lady appeared to the Knights of the Teutonic Order. I went and saw some ancient sites in Turkey and in Athens and kind of walked through some of the ancient sites where the lady was venerated in antiquity and found out some really interesting histories that I'll share on some future episodes, but that's not what I want to talk about on this episode. I'll get what this episode will be about in just a few minutes, but first I want to tell you something else that I've been working on this summer. So many of you know that I have written 7 very doctrinally dense books. These books reference thousands of different scriptures, and they go into tremendous detail on a host of different topics. Many of those topics we cover in high-level detail in this Black Swan Rising podcast, but not everyone has the wherewithal to pick up a doctrinally dense book like this and digest it. So I've been working over the summer on a new project, which is to create a delivery system that is far easier to digest than the books that I have written so far. And the way that I'm going about it, and I'm really excited about this, is I'm trying to take all of this doctrine and all of these scriptures and all the patterns that are inherent throughout thousands and thousands of pages of scriptures and ancient documents, and weave them together into a story, a nonfiction story that's based off of the life of Enoch. And I'm drawing heavily upon the Book of Enoch, which, of course, in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 57, it says that the Book of Enoch will be testified of in due time. And so I'm using that Book of Enoch as kind of the backbone of this series, and it will be a series. And I think it is so cool, right? I get up early in the morning, I work till late at night crafting this thing, and it's written in such a way that I think that a much younger audience will be able to enjoy this. And then, of course, I'm writing it so that there's notes on each chapter at the end of the book, so that if you want to dig deeper into the subject matter that I go over, you can certainly do that. But the idea is that it's a gateway into some of these deeper, denser topics that I cover in exhaustive detail in some of my other written work. So this project is something I'm super excited about, and I hope to have it done sometime. And I'm targeting maybe the fall, but very excited about that. Now let's get to this week's episode. So I have had numerous readers of my books and listeners to this podcast. They always reach out to me. Anyone can reach out to me at my email, which is michael@thelast10tribes.com. And they've been sending me different links to different YouTube video presentations, things like that. And one of the common themes has been, interestingly enough, secret combinations. So I've watched some of these, and these guys that are doing these things, they're doing a great job. But I have never seen anybody really approach this subject the way that I think it needs to be approached to be able to be understood holistically. And of course, on the Black Swan Rising podcast, we are specifically catered to talk to some of these strange phenomenon. And really, if you're just thinking that a secret combination is some infiltration into the government and they're working towards their own ends, yes, that is true, but there's more to that. And that's what I want to talk about on today's episode. Now, I have always believed that if you want to understand the events of the last days, there is no better framework to understand these things than the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Because you can read some of this stuff in the Bible and other ancient documents, and it's all there. But there is a richness that can only be found in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And I want to use that background today and incorporate it in with the Book of Enoch and some of the topics that we have discussed on prior episodes to really dig into this and hopefully help you understand the way that I look at these secret combinations and how that will impact the events of the last days from my perspective, from the perspective of Black Swan events. Now, if you look at the first couple of chapters in the book of Genesis, you notice something very curious. There are two separate genealogical lines that are given. Both of these are 7-generation lines. Both of them obviously start from Adam, but one of them is a satanic branch, goes through Cain. But then there's this other covenant-keeping genealogy that goes 7 generations from Adam that is in parallel. And the question is, why? Why does it go out to the 7 generations and then stop? That is the thing most people who are talking about secret combinations that they miss, because this first satanic line, obviously it starts with Cain and this covenant that Cain enters into with Satan. And you can read about this, as I said, you can read about it in the first couple of chapters of the book of Genesis, but I think that you get the clearest story from the Pearl of Great Price in Moses chapters 5 and 6. So that's where I want to start today, just going through this. If you look at Moses chapter 5, you learn that not only did Cain kill Abel, but you learn that there was a very specific reason that Cain did that. And let's read that right now. So I am reading from Moses chapter 5, verses 29 through 31. And Satan said unto Cain, Swear unto me by thy throat, and if thou tell it, thou shalt die. And swear thy brethren by their heads, and by the living God, that they tell it not. For if they tell it, they shall surely die. Okay, so let's pause right here, and let me just point out that this isn't just Satan and Cain. Satan wants Cain to administer this secret oath to his brethren. So here we have the rise of an organization, okay? And this is important. Now we jump to verse 30. And Satan sware unto Cain that he would do according to his commandments, and all these things were done in secret. So the reason that Cain slew his brother Abel was to bind Satan to his will. Okay, this is really interesting because it's a supernatural component that most people are overlooking when they're talking about secret combinations, really as a means to obtain political power and the glory of men. There's something more to it. There is this supernatural component. And unless you understand that these secret combinations are rooted in the supernatural, you're missing a major component. Now, it goes on to give Cain's genealogy here. It said that Cain, he had a son Enoch, and Enoch had a son Irad, and Irad had a son Mahajuel, and Mahajuel had a son Methusael, and Methusael had a son Lamech. Now, Lamech gets us 7 generations from Adam. And these are the brethren that Satan was talking about. And Lamech, actually, if you read in verse 49, of Moses chapter 5, you learn that Lamech becomes Master Mahan, just like Cain was. Let me read that verse for you. For Lamech, having entered into a covenant with Satan, after the manner of Cain, wherein he became Master Mahan, master of that great secret, which was administered unto Cain by Satan. That is important. Satan himself administered this covenant to Cain, and Lamech is Master Mahan because he entered into this same covenant with Lucifer. Cain did. So what we're not told is why this record stops at Lamech. But in chapter 6, we learn of this parallel line of righteous covenant men, and it starts with Abel, but Cain slew Abel. And one thing that we tend to overlook here, but friends, there are so many things that we overlook in the scriptures just because we presume that we know everything that is being discussed. And our presumption of answers keeps us from understanding things as they truly are. And let me give you an example. If you look at the beginning couple of verses of Moses chapter 5, you learn something really interesting. Let's start in verse 2. And Adam knew his wife, and she bare unto him sons and daughters. And they began to multiply and replenish the earth. And from that time forth, the sons and daughters of Adam began to divide 2 and 2 in the land, and to till the land, and to tend flocks. And they also begat sons and daughters. So right out of the gate, we learn that Adam and Eve start having children, both sons and daughters, and that they begin to multiply and replenish the earth, and that they begin to pair off 2 by 2. And then it gives us their occupations. They were either tenders of flocks or they tilled the land. All of this information is given to us before the story of Cain and Abel. What's the occupation of Cain and Abel? Cain was a tiller of the land, and Abel was a keeper of flocks. So we are told that these two men are falling into these two separate occupations. When you read this, Cain and Abel are operating separate households. They're offering their own sacrifices. They're not relying on mom and dad to do this for them. Okay? So from the context of this, Cain and Abel, they're married. In fact, we know that right after Cain kills Abel, that he leaves with his wife, and that's when it starts talking about this other darker covenant line. And in these scriptures, it only ever talks about someone's child when that is a male child. So we know that Cain had male children, and it does not tell us that Abel had any male children. But when you look in the Doctrine and Covenants at Enoch's priesthood line, it traces Enoch's priesthood line not back to Seth, but back to Abel. Now, I believe that what happens here is probably, and you see this throughout the Old Testament, when a man is killed, falls to his brother to raise up a posterity unto him. And I do not think that it is out of the realm of possibility that Seth raised up a posterity unto his slain brother Abel through Abel's wife. And when you're living to be over 900 years old, what does 20 some odd years and age difference mean anything? But yeah, I'm not trying to convince you that any of this happened. I'm just trying to show you that, hey, there are some details in here that suggest there's more to this story. It doesn't connect all of these dots for us. It's left for us to connect. And this righteous posterity, it goes from, we know that Seth begat Enos, and Enos begat Canaan, and Canaan begat Mahalalel, and Mahalalel begat Jared, and Jared begat Enoch. And Enoch is 7 generations from Adam. So you have Enoch and you have Lamech. You have Master Mahan and you have Enoch, who prior to Enoch's day, the priesthood was referred to as the priesthood after the order of the Son of God. But in Enoch's day, it receives a new name. It is called the priesthood after the order of Enoch. And you can read about that so that you know that I'm not just making this up in Doctrine and Covenants, section 76, verse 57, which basically is referring to the heirs of the celestial kingdom and how they will be priests after the order of Melchizedek, which was after the order of Enoch, which was after the order of the Son of God, meaning that the priesthood was named after Enoch. So you have, in 7 generations from Adam, you have a Master Mahan and Lamech, and you have a man who was magnified his calling to such a degree that they stopped calling it the priesthood after the order of the Son of God and started calling it the holy priesthood after the order of Enoch. Now, note, they didn't do that for Adam. They didn't do it for Seth or Enos or Canaan or Mahalalel or Jared. Now, all of those men were preachers of righteousness. When you look at Moses chapter 6, verse 23, that's exactly what it says. So why Enoch? And again, why does this genealogy stop after the 7 generations? That's what I want to talk about today. Now, it becomes clear from a detailed study of Moses 5 and 6 that there is great conflict between these two covenant lines. One line has covenanted with Satan and the other has covenanted with God. You see that right out of the gate with the establishment of the satanic covenant, which was established through the shedding of Abel's blood, and the righteous covenant, which was established through the blood of the Son of God. Now, within 325 years of these two lines, Moses chapter 6, verse 15, says something that I think we ought to think about. It says this, "And the children of men were numerous upon the face of the land. And in those days Satan had great dominion amongst men, and raged in their hearts. And from thenceforth came wars and bloodshed, and a man's hand was against his own brother in administering death, because of secret works seeking for power." Okay, so there is no loyalty amongst this secret work of darkness. And so you have this bloodshed that's happening all the time. Now, you've got both of these lines existing on the earth in these days, but listen to verse 17, because I think that most people don't realize that this ever even happened. "And Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos and the residue of the people of God came out of the land which was called Shulon, and dwelt in a land of promise, which he called after his own son, whom he named Canaan." So 325 years after the fall of Adam, the people of God fled their first lands of inheritance. Does this sound familiar? And they fled because of these secret combinations. And they went to a land of promise, which we must assume was quite a ways away from the civilization that had been corrupted by these secret works of darkness. We see this happen amongst the Jaredites. And of course, the daughter of Jared, who founded the secret combinations in the Book of Mormon, she pointed to this 7-generation covenant with Satan as the template that the Jaredites could use to obtain great power and glory. So you also had a body in the Jaredites that had to flee from these secret combinations. You had that amongst the Nephites fleeing from the secret combinations. This happened 325 years after the fall. Now, we just celebrated the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. Think of how much this country changed in 250 years. So after 325 years, these guys were leaving a lot behind. Okay, they left everything for a land of promise. They didn't do it because they wanted to. They did it because they were being driven by these secret works of darkness. And they didn't want to take up their sword against their neighbor. So they fled. And this is where Enoch grew up. He was raised in the land of Canaan. This is the background for my nonfiction series. It takes place during this period of time. Now, friends, there's more detail on what I've just read than is found in the book of Genesis on this. And that's because I'm reading from the Pearl of Great Price. And that's important. And the Pearl of Great Price does not come out of the gate with this. This is coming out of Moses chapter 5. What does Moses start with? Right out of the gate, Moses starts with a context that I believe that we are supposed to understand everything else that follows. And that context is numerous inhabited worlds. If you just read the chapter heading for the book of Moses, it says, God revealed himself to Moses. Moses is transfigured. He is confronted by Satan. Satan is the orchestrator, administrator of these secret works of darkness. Moses sees many inhabited worlds. Worlds without number were created by the Son of God. Okay, this is the context that was laid down before we ever started talking about secret combinations. Okay? And I think that is important. That's why these two tandem genealogies stop 7 generations in, because during both the days of Lamech and the days of Enoch, according to the Book of Enoch, something unbelievable happens. According to the Book of Enoch, 200 men descend upon Mount Hermon in those days. Now, the difference between the Watchers and Cain's line is that they come to the earth with technology, according to the Book of Enoch, that revolutionizes everything. And the kind of the ringleader for these secret works of darkness amongst the Watchers is a watcher by the name of Azazel. And Azazel becomes Master Mahan. Now, when you read in the Book of Enoch in chapter 54, verse 6, and I'm particularly talking about the translation from Lawrence, he states that the Watchers were the ministers of Satan. Understand this from the perspective of this satanic covenant line, wherein Satan himself administered the oath. This is the oath that Mount Hermon was named for. These Watchers bound themselves by this oath. And we know this because Enoch is told by God to go and confront the Watchers and to take all of the sins of the entire world and bind them to Azazel. Azazel will be blamed for every sin that has transpired upon the face of the earth. So ask yourself, why is Azazel being held responsible instead of Lamech, who is Master Mahan, the leader of these secret works of darkness? Because when you get folks come in here with advanced technology, they usurp that organization very quickly. That is why these generations stop when it gets to the 7th generation. And this is why the priesthood, after the order of the Son of God, gets renamed to the priesthood after the order of Enoch, because Enoch goes head to head with these guys. And this is really important for us to understand, because when we talk about these things, we like to whitewash it all. We like to sanitize it. But these things, when you read about it from the perspective of the Book of Enoch, it's not sanitary at all. And again, Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 57, states that the Book of Enoch will be testified of in due time. It's talking about this very Book of Enoch. We know that because this very Book of Enoch is quoted by Peter and Jude and John and Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ refers to himself as the Son of Man. That title didn't come from the Pearl of Great Price, friends. It came from the Book of Enoch. When you study the Pearl of Great Price and you study the Son of Man, that title specifically, you will learn something fascinating, that when you're looking at messianic usages of the term Son of Man, there is one usage that is absolutely messianic for sure, and that comes out of Daniel. And Daniel is quoting from the Book of Enoch when he uses that, because he says that he saw one coming in the clouds of heaven like unto the Son of Man. He's saying like unto the Son of Man that you read about in the Book of Enoch, who comes in the clouds of heaven in its opening verse. Okay, you have Abraham use the term Son of Man in the exact same way, that he saw someone like unto the Son of Man, meaning Abraham had the Book of Enoch and he met the person who is like the Son of Man in the Book of Enoch. So when Jesus Christ was referring to himself as the Son of Man, he was referring to himself from the prophecies that exist within the Book of Enoch that talk about the Son of Man. So this is all important context for this. Now, what did Enoch do that was so spectacular that the priesthood was renamed after him? If you read in Moses chapter 7, one of the first things that jumps out is that Enoch received power over the elements. He literally changed the courses of rivers. He literally caused mountains to relocate. Associated with Enoch, we read about a new land that comes up out of the ocean. Okay? Enoch had power over the elements. No one else that we have read in the scriptures up to this point was given this kind of power. Enoch is the first. Another thing that is interesting, we read about this in Moses 7, verse 13, was that the protection of Zion, the protection of Enoch's people, is associated with the roaring of lions, meaning that the lions were working with Enoch to protect his people. That's curious. The animals obeyed Enoch, not only the elements, but the animals themselves. Then when you read in Moses 13 and 14, he's wielding his control over the elements in order to protect the people of Zion. And he wields this power so effectively that the watchers and the children of the watchers, who were giants, they feared him greatly and stood afar off. Now, of course, another thing that Enoch did was he went and preached to the people and got them to repent. And those that repented came and joined him and his people. And they were ultimately lifted up into heaven. An entire nation was translated. Now, curiously enough, on this podcast, we've talked numerous times that the reason that people are translated, according to the prophet Joseph Smith, was so they could administer to the inhabitants of other worlds. So Enoch and his people, in the context of Moses 1, are now administering to the inhabitants of the heavens. Now, all of these things are very interesting, and we're told by Jesus Christ that our days are going to mirror the pre-Diluvian world. And when you look back on this and you overlay the Book of Enoch into our day, it's extremely interesting, because Enoch says that the entire reason that he's writing the Book of Enoch is because the watchers will return in our day in 70 generations. Now, I've talked about this elsewhere. If you take a generation to be the life expectancy of a man who has survived childhood, prior to modern medicine, the average generation of a man was the early 60s. So you take the reset that occurred with the Great Flood and you divide that by 62, say, you get that would give you 70 incremental periods that end in our day. And what's going on in our day? We're starting to have all of these strange, unidentified aerial phenomenon that Congress is talking about, UFOs, non-human intelligences coming to Earth exactly at the time that Enoch said these things were going to happen. And even more peculiar than this is the fact that the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and many of the prophets that prophesy of this latter-day Antichrist that will rise to power in the last days, this Antichrist is the one that destroys the secret combinations. And he doesn't destroy them out of the goodness of his heart. He destroys them to consolidate power. He does exactly what Azazel did to Lamech. He takes over. He doesn't need the apparatus of the Whore of Babylon. We read about the destruction of the Whore of Babylon, which takes place in a single hour in the book of Revelation. I believe it's chapter 17. and he destroys the whore because he hates the whore. And then he consolidates this power with an entity that's known as the beast, and they subject the saints to themselves, and they perform miracles in the eyes of all people. This is the exact same kind of supernatural infusion into these secret works of darkness that took place in Enoch's day, which is why the priesthood was renamed after Enoch. Now, we've been talking about the priesthood and how it was renamed to be the priesthood after the order of Enoch. But that's not what we call it today. We call it the Melchizedek priesthood. When did that change take place, and why did it take place? That is incredibly important for us to understand if we want to see the whole picture of all of this. And in order to understand that, we need to flip open to the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis chapter 14. Now, I'm going to start reading this. This is Joseph Smith translation, Genesis 14. I'm starting in verse 25. And Melchizedek lifted up his voice and blessed Abram. And Melchizedek was a man of faith who wrought righteousness, and when a child he feared God and stopped the mouths of lions and quenched the violence of fire. Now, friends, we need to read between the lines here to understand what's really going on. What we're reading here is that when Melchizedek was a child, he stopped the mouths of lions and quenched the violence of fire. Where in the scriptures do you have other examples of this exact same thing happening to children? You go back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were cast into a fiery furnace that was heated 7 times beyond its capacity, and they were thrown into that furnace by the Babylonians because they feared God more than the Babylonians. That is exactly what this verse is saying, that when a child, he feared God. In other words, Melchizedek grew up in an adversarial environment. And because of that adversarial environment, he was thrown into fire, which didn't hurt him, just like the flames did not hurt Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then we have the story of Daniel, who was a peer to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who was thrown into the lion's den because he feared God more than the Babylonians. And of course, God stopped the mouths of the lions. So Melchizedek is a choice youth, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were choice youths, just like Enoch, who was chosen when he was but a lad. So this is a very important parallel. It also demonstrates to us that Melchizedek was given power over the elements, because in antiquity, fire was considered one of the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Enoch had control of those same elements. Okay, so let's continue into verse 27. And thus having been approved of God, meaning him quenching the violence of fire and shutting the mouths of lions, happened because Melchizedek was acting in accordance with God's will. He was ordained a high priest after the order of the covenant which God made with Enoch. So Melchizedek didn't think that he had the Melchizedek priesthood. He believed that he had the priesthood after the order of Enoch, which is what it was called then. And it was called that because Enoch had done all of these things. And now in verse 28. It being after the order of the Son of God, which order came not by man, nor by will of man, neither by father nor mother, neither by beginning of days or end of years, but of God. And it was delivered unto men by the calling of his own voice, according to his own will, unto as many as believed on his name. For God, having sworn unto Enoch and unto his seed with an oath by himself, that everyone being ordained after this order and calling should have power by faith to break mountains, to divide the seas, to dry up waters, and to turn them out of their courses, to put at defiance the armies of nations, to divide the earth, to break every band, to stand in the presence of God, and to do all things in accordance with his will, according to his command, subduing principalities and powers. When we're talking about principalities and powers, friends, we're talking about these things from the context of the New Testament, when it says we're not wrestling with flesh, with men, but with these kinds of powers and principalities, meaning demonic forces, these supernatural embodiments of power on earth. These same kinds of powers that the Watchers had become the administrators of. The same things were happening in Melchizedek's day. That is really interesting. And if you don't understand this, you don't understand really the quintessential nature of these secret combinations that have threatened the existence of the earth in times past. And will it threaten the existence of the earth in the last days? We've got the Whore of Babylon, sure enough, today. And sure enough, the Whore of Babylon is based in supernatural things. But the order of power that they have obtained, whereas it is scary and can bring down our nation, it hasn't risen near to the level that it will rise to once the Watchers come out of the shadows and take control, as they did in the days of Enoch, and as I will explain, they did in the days of Melchizedek. If you read in the book of Jubilee, which is really the only book that tells us why the land of Canaan, which was the land that Melchizedek was in, was filled with giants. When you read specifically in chapter 10 of the book of Jubilee, it says that in the days of Noah's grandchildren, that the Watchers returned and that they re-entered into a covenant with Satan. And the grandsons of Noah came to Noah and said, "You have got to do something about this. These guys are taking over everything. We can't contend with these guys. Do something about it." So Noah goes to God and says, "Listen, we can't do anything about these guys. We don't have Enoch here. You have to intervene on our behalf." And interestingly enough, Noah was not endowed with this power. God intervened and wiped out the Watchers himself. And the book of Jubilee says that 10% or a remnant of the giants was left because Satan was complaining to God saying, "Hey, if you wipe out all of these guys, how am I even going to tempt man?" And so a remnant of the Watchers was left. Not the Watchers themselves, but the giants and some of their technology. You'll recall that the giants of Canaan had these mysterious iron chariots that even Joshua and Caleb could not overcome. And they're not overcome until the kings of heaven come down and contend against Sisera and his iron chariots. I've already talked about that at length in a prior episode. You can go back and look at that. But this is the environment that Melchizedek was living in, because as we continue to read, he dwelt in Salem. Let's get to this right here in verse 32. I'm going to keep reading. "And men having this faith, coming up into this order of God, were translated and taken up into heaven." So men that obtained the order of Enoch were translated. Okay, so let's just stop here for a second and unpack this, because today we are under the impression that the Melchizedek priesthood and the order of Enoch are one and the same. We call the priesthood the Melchizedek priesthood because Melchizedek did the exact same things that Enoch did under the exact same circumstances that Enoch did them. And so the priesthood became named after Melchizedek. But when you read about the Melchizedek priesthood and the Doctrine and Covenants, really about both priesthoods, we are told that the Aaronic priesthood holds the keys to the preparatory gospel, meaning that it's preparing us for something greater. And it explicitly states that it's the gospel of repentance and baptism, and that the Melchizedek priesthood holds the keys for the administration of the ordinances of salvation. And that is really what the Melchizedek priesthood, as we have it today, is. It is largely an administrative priesthood. We use the priesthood to bless the sacrament, to baptize, to carry out all of the ordinances of the temple, and to do, basically, to maintain the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Case in point, say that you have a priesthood holder, and that priesthood holder happens to be a doofus, as most priesthood holders prove to be. And he goes out, let's say this is a priest, and he's going out and he's doing dumb things that he should not be doing as a priesthood man, as a covenant man. And he comes in and he blesses the sacrament and that sacrament gets administered to the congregation. Is the sacrament null and void because the priest is not keeping his covenant? And the answer is obviously no, it is not. Because the priesthood today is largely the administration of keys. And those keys are not invalidated by the worthiness of the holder. Now, that may sound controversial to say, but let's just say that the same doofus of a priest baptizes his younger brother. Is that baptism valid or not? Of course it's valid. And it's valid because God respects the authority of the priesthood, even if the priest himself is a total doofus. And you have examples of this throughout the Old Testament, where you have doofus priests that are administering the covenants and ordinances unto the house of Israel, even though they themselves are doofuses, because God honors the authority of that priesthood. What is not honored by any stretch is the power in the priesthood. Okay, these are two separate things. This whole power in the priesthood, according to the order of Enoch, that is something that, frankly, we're not familiar with. We have not seen this modeled. And according to this translation, the people that model this kind of behavior, they get translated. And again, the reason they get translated is so they can minister the gospel to the inhabitants of other worlds. Again, the context of Moses chapter 1. So if you look at the instances wherein people received this endowment of power after the order of Enoch. Now, this endowment of power doesn't just come willy-nilly. We don't see this operating on a daily basis like the saints who lived in Enoch's day and Melchizedek's day did. And why did they see these things? Because their very lives depended upon someone being able to exercise this kind of power. The secret combinations had been enabled with this supernatural power and influence that made it impossible for the saints of God to coexist without this kind of power. And this, in fact, is the template that you see throughout the scriptural record anytime this kind of power is exercised. When you see Elijah exercising this kind of power, it's because the sons of the prophets were being hunted down by Jezebel and exterminated. Elisha was a son of the prophets. It's clear from the scriptures, if you study it, that both men and women were the sons of the prophets. They were just ordinary saints that were striving to live these higher covenants. And they were being persecuted, hunted down, and exterminated. And so God gave an outpouring of his power to both Elijah and Elisha to preserve the righteous. You see this again in Moses' day. Moses wielded this kind of power and authority over the elements. The Red Sea divided because Moses commanded it to. And why? Not just because Moses wanted to show people how awesome this power was, but because if Moses didn't do that, the saints would have been exterminated. The saints would have also died in the Judean wilderness when they wandered there for 40 years if Moses didn't have this kind of power to be able to sustain them. So this is why this power has been shared with man in the past, and it's why we don't see this kind of power today. But Jesus Christ told us, as I've said, that our days are going to mirror the days of Enoch. And I want to just talk about that in a little more detail now, because I've reviewed the days of Melchizedek, I've reviewed the days of Enoch. Enoch says the watchers will return in our days. That's just like in his day. Enoch went out and gathered the folks into his city, and the same thing is going to happen in the last days. We know that the folks are going to be gathered into the New Jerusalem. In the days of Enoch, the lions, the roar of the lions protected the saints, and according to many of the prophecies in the Old Testament and Christ's prophecies in 3rd Nephi, the lions are going to come and defend the saints again in the last days, which he refers to the remnant of Jacob as being those lions that will come. Also, in the days of Enoch, you had the secret combinations that were headed up by the Master Mahan of those days, which when Enoch was on the scene, that was Lamech, and then the Watchers came and usurped that organization and ruled the world with much greater power and influence than Lamech ever obtained. The same is going to be true for our day. We know that this Antichrist is going to come and he is going to usurp the secret combinations of the world. We read about this in Daniel 11. I've done an entire episode on this, so you can go and refresh yourself on that if you don't know what I'm talking about. But this man comes, he destroys the secret combinations, and he rules with absolute power upon the face of the earth. So these parallels are stark, and there's this massive sifting of the people that happened in Enoch's day, and it will happen in our day. Now, in Enoch's day, you had this absolute outpouring of power upon Enoch. We learn, if you read in, again, going back to Daniel chapter 11, that this Antichrist figure is not only going to overflow the secret combinations, the Whore of Babylon, but it explicitly states in Daniel 11 that he will overflow the prince of the covenant. When I read that, I'm thinking the administrators of the covenant will be suppressed by this Antichrist figure. So that is the context that we should understand this verse in 1 Nephi 14:14 that says that the saints are going to be endowed with great power. And that it's not just the saints, it's also the covenant people of the Lord. And I've gone to great lengths throughout the Black Swan Rising podcast that this covenant people of the Lord refers to the entire restoration of the house of Israel, of which the saints of God are a subset. These are the groups that are going to be endowed with great power, this Enoch type covenant situation. You also have the prophet Jeremiah that stated that in the last days, the Lord is going to do a new thing on the earth. And that new thing is that he is going to make it so that a woman can compass a man. That is something that has never happened before. Women have typically always been hosed by men when men are doing the hosing. Jeremiah 31:22 says that's not going to be the case anymore in the last days. And the reason that it's not going to be the case is this endowment of power that happens to the saints. Now, saints is a very broad term. It's very similar to the people of understanding that we read about in Daniel chapter 11, where in the last days, the people of understanding will do great exploits. And they'll be empowered to do those great exploits because of this Enochian covenant that when the world descends to this kind of chaos and the very existence of the righteous is drawn into question, that is when the Lord pours out this kind of power. And this kind of power, it's an absolute game changer. Now, we're talking about power that will go beyond anything that Moses ever saw. That's one of the things that when you read about the restoration of the house of Israel, you read that it will rival the exodus of Egypt. Moses, he did some incredible things, but Moses didn't have this Enochian covenant. I mean, said another way, there's a reason that we don't call it the priesthood of Moses. We call it the Melchizedek priesthood, which was after the order of Enoch, because these two men did things that were crazy. Just completely in a realm of their own. That is the kind of activity that is going to happen again on the earth in the last days. And when that activity starts to happen again, the paradigm is going to be completely shifted, and we will be the kind of people that will be able to found a Zion society Whereas right now, if we're brutally honest, there's just so much of this that is still theoretical in nature. We're just hacking our way. We're just walking through the darkness and trying to figure this out. It's this kind of behavior. It's not really modeled for us, but that will change. And it's going to be modeled to such a degree that we will become Zion. And not only that, the city of Enoch will return to the earth because we will have become like them. And we will achieve that before they return. And the people of Melchizedek, who were also translated, will also return at that same time. So these are things that lie in the very near future. And at the core of all of this are the machinations of these secret combinations. When you dig into some of these whistleblower accounts, they're talking crazy stuff. So if this is true, then we're going to see these kinds of endowments of power happening as well, because that has always been the impetus for this in the past. This isn't just us wanting this covenant and then receiving it. It is a need, and so the will of God is aligned with the preservation of his saints, and we receive this endowment of power so that we can survive the machinations of these conspiring organizations that are going to once again go to the next level because of the return of the Watchers. And I know that all of this sounds bonkers, but I'm not making this up. This is all in the Book of Enoch, which God said would be testified of in due time. And now we're hearing about all of this stuff in the news if we'll just pull our head out of the sand and listen. So when I think about secret combinations, guys, and the last days and the threat and the awfulness of our situation, if the secret combinations were not going to be enabled and emboldened in ways like they were in the days of Melchizedek and Enoch, we could probably survive it, but that's not going to be what happens. It's going to the next level. And it's clear, it's crystal clear. The scriptures are crystal clear on this. We just have confirmation biases that prohibit us from looking at this stuff with eyes to see what's truly going on. So I'm hoping that this is useful to you and that it helps you to at least understand how I am viewing these things. And I'm not telling you that I've got this all figured out, that I know everything that's going to happen in the exact order that it's going to happen. But the patterns that exist and how eerily they seem to be lining up to Enoch's day and Melchizedek's day, and the fact that in the Book of Enoch that we are explicitly told that this is going to be the case. And then you have the words of Isaiah that talk about all of these things. These are the kinds of things that the 19 Isaiah chapters that are transcribed in the Book of Mormon are talking about. This is exactly what the Book of Revelation is talking about. And if you understand these things and you can take them at face value, when you read those things, they make a heck of a lot more sense. But if you will not acknowledge that something highly unusual is going on, well, of course this sounds bonkers, and I sound like I'm out of my mind. But if you can realize that every single black swan event in history has always been bonkers on the front end, and then retroactively looking back at the evidence that was always there, it becomes obvious that it was always going to happen this way. And that's, again, the whole point of this podcast. It's not to convince you of this stuff. It's just to show you these patterns. And if these patterns are legitimate, we don't need to be blindsided by these kinds of black swan events. We can anticipate them and prepare for them in advance. And if we have eyes to see, it's obvious that this stuff is coming down the pipeline. This is exactly the message that Christ gave to the Nephites regarding what was going to happen to the Gentiles, aka us, in the last days. People are going to be deceived largely by this Antichrist figure who is going to bring deception to the next level. But there are deceptions of all kinds. And so I'm going to talk about some of those in the next episode. And then I promise I will do an upcoming episode where I go through the things that I saw on my trip over to Europe and down into South America over this summer, because I really did come out of there with some really interesting insights on some things that I think are going to be very relevant to the events of the last days. Again, friends, we need to take responsibility for our own spiritual education. We need to be the ones that are opening our own eyes and not relegating that responsibility to somebody else. Because as the Lord has repeatedly told us, they that seek shall find. Until next time, friends, God bless.
You have just finished an episode of the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production, hosted by Michael B. Rush. For show notes, transcriptions, and extras, please visit www.theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, click the share button icon and send it to your friends and family. This will help to ensure the continued publication of future content. Michael thanks you in advance for sharing and looks forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.